Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of Severance Season 2, Episode 7. Make sure to hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of Severance. I'm also doing White Lotus at the moment as well. I really like that in the past they shoot this on film. It really sets the mood for it and separates it from every other kind of visual we've seen in Severance before, and the show's always trying to top itself, and it does a good job at doing that, and I think that adds to it that everything in the past with Gemma feels like you're watching a really good indie film. But we're at Gans College, where we know that Mark was a history professor, and this is where he met Gemma, who was a Russian literature professor. And when you're watching this, you're realizing that Mark, who is reintegrating and is laying on his couch, is experiencing these memories that any Mark is kind of learning now about Outie Mark, and that Outie Mark is facing his grief full time again. We get, as the kids would say, a meet cute between them when they're donating blood, and we'll see this setup where Gemma is reading a paper on the novella The Death of Ivan Ilitch. And this is going to get paid off later when we see her with the doctor and he picks up this book, and you see they have similar reactions where Mark says, "Oh, I don't want spoilers," and then him saying, the doctor, that he must die at the end. But in that book, when it's interpreted, a lot of people say that book has an argument that death is the enemy, and that makes sense that that would be a book brought up in the show because that is a very Kier-esque belief about beating death. And it's about themes of religious conversion, which would make sense about people converting to the Kier way of living. Now, there's a cool match cut where you go from donating blood here in this nice moment to her actually having her blood taken by Sandra Bernhardt in the basement. This is from her going to the export hall to this mysterious location we haven't seen. So anyone who's complaining about having got enough answers yet, this whole episode is a giant answer. This is the most answers we've gotten any episode of Severance to date. And that makes it really exciting too, because not only is it emotionally powerful and driven, it's giving you satisfaction of questions you've had lingering, while adding some little mysteries as well. Now, it's fitting that the basement is this area, because as we learn through this episode, we're seeing it through Gemma's eyes in one day of it, and that it is basically hell. So it makes sense where it's located. It makes MDR look like a fun time now. I mean, at least in MDR, they get to be with other peers, and they get to have a lot of parties, like a waffle party. And you see that Sandra Bernhardt will say to her, "Gemma, where did you go?" So she's also thinking about these moments in the past as we see Mark is. While this is all happening, in real time, Devin and Ragabi are not getting along. At one point, Devin threatens to throw her off a bridge, which I thought was so funny. But Ragabi gives her the important info that Devin needs to know now that Gemma is actually alive. Now, back to Gemma in the basement. I love that when we see there's an eye test in front of her. Of course, one of them is of goats. And she's given the device to hold with two hands that's similar to the E-meter in Scientology. And she even asked Sandra Bernhardt, "Have you done your reading?" Which is also very similar to Scientology, where they have to read a bunch of literature on their belief and then take these tests that see how accurate their brain is in that way they should be going, kind of like a lie detector test, but it's feeling their electronic energy. And that's why she asked the question, if you were caught in a mudslide, more scared of suffocating or drowning. So somewhere in her reading, there has to be an answer that fits to the Kier belief and what you should say to that. So she'll ask her how many rooms today, and she's told 6. And this is where she sighs, and she has to put on this red dress that's waiting for her in her closet, which also has a wig. And already seeing her sigh and her reaction to this, you know that this is the real Gemma and how much she's aware of what's going on and how much she doesn't like it. Now, in this hallway she's brought in, we see the city names all around that are the names of the files they work on in MDR. And the first one she goes into is Wellington. But what's interesting, she goes into Wellington and you hear the ding and she's entered a severed state. Where this is brutal is we've only seen with our MDR people when they go down the elevator into the MDR location, the severed floor, they get the ding in that one location. But Gemma has to go through multiple, and her chip reacts to multiple different locations that sever her into different states. The Gemma we see getting her teeth addressed isn't the same Gemma we're seeing writing Christmas cards. And not the same Gemma, of course, in the hallway. And not the same Gemma that's also Miss Casey, which we'll get to. But when she's in this dentist's office, she's greeted by Dr. Maurer. This is the same guy we saw who was taking all the dentist supplies from O&D in the previous episode, and is still whistling when we see him here. So we can assume that in that timeline, that is where obviously we are. That's what we're seeing that day of Gemma here. And it also, of course, confirmed in seeing how close Cold Harbor is to being finished. And you see she's like, can I please get a break just for a little while? And he's like, but it's been 6 weeks. She's like, I was just here. He's like, I know, nobody likes dentists. So this is a life she's going through of just somebody who's going to the dentist every time they're in an awakened state. How awful is that? So she comes out and her mouth is sore. So she's still feeling the physical ailment to what she just experienced, but doesn't remember it. And she passes on her way that Cold Harbor door, and she notices the Cold Harbor sticker out there. So she isn't even aware of what the heck goes on in this last room. But I love the transitions that happen in this episode. Really good editing, especially when we transition through Mark's brain into his eye, and we go back to the past, and we're seeing the past Mark exiting on an elevator, of course, in the college to see Gemma. And of course, when he sees her in her office, she sneezes twice. And what have we learned about Gemma? That when she sneezes, she always sneezes twice. A nice touch there. And we get to see their honeymoon phase. And what's cool is when they show their honeymoon phase of them, it goes through pretty quickly. But before that even rockets through that timeline, we get to see that he got a baby gate because it was on sale. So it's setting up the tragedy that's going to happen with Mark and Gemma before even the tragedy of Lumon taking over their lives. But when they go through that phase, which was smart to kind of skim through it with the editing quicker of that honeymoon phase, we see them landing at a dinner here with Rickon and Devin. And they've talked about on the After Show podcast with Ben Stiller and Adam Scott that Rickon and Mark probably got along before this tragedy happened with Gemma. And we see that's pretty much the case here, and that they are getting along as a double date here. Now we see Gemma doesn't want alcohol, so Devin connects the dots that she is pregnant. And I love that while we're learning that information, if you listen closely to the background, Rickon is saying to Mark, did you know that you can purify your urine into drinkable water? And Mark just says, why would I do that? And he says, to experience the beauty of wonder and nature. It's so funny that they always slip in humor here, especially with Rickon. But I love this transition. It was my favorite of the episode, where this happy moment Gemma's having with Devin and them connecting that she's pregnant. It's a close-up of her eyes, and it goes right to her most traumatic moment when she has her miscarriage. And when she's in the shower with Mark and this happens, there's a wild transition here of the water from the shower going up. So you're seeing everything is just clicking in this episode, from the directing to the acting to the writing and the editing. And it shows you for a moment Miss Casey and that favorite day she had where she was there for 8 hours. We know she's part-time because the other time she's downstairs in the basement, but it was her favorite day, the day she was watching Helly, because she got to spend that much time with those people and other people, and she liked Mark. And those kind of feelings for him kind of bled through. But it was cool that he transitioned from the wires in his brain to the wires under the desk of a man who looks like Mark. So we're talking about answers here. We're seeing people who are like the MDR counterparts, and they're all similar looking to who they're working on. And we see it's confirmed through the computer screens. You see Irving, you see Helly, you see Devin. So what I believe is that this guy who looks like Mark and is working on Mark on the computer is the guy everyone's talking about in episode 1 we saw this season, that someone looked like Mark behind him that was blurred out watching him. I think it was this guy. And this is a show that's shown us it cares about all our sideline characters and that they have to feel like they've been lived in. So I feel like this character we're seeing in the computer seems like he's almost robotic in a way, but I feel like he's going to be more important as the show goes on. And I think he was curious about what goes on with these people, and even in his facial reaction this episode and what they were doing, he didn't seem like he was all about it. So I wonder if we're going to learn more about these 4 characters down below in this room. Now I see they have 4 buttons, so I'm thinking those obviously connect to the 4 tempers, and they do other things too. Like we'll see when he's looking at Gemma's x-rays from after being with a dentist, which I think was a misdirect, thinking he was looking at her teeth, but I think he's actually looking at something to go on with her brain, and that everything was working with the tempers. I also think they could be triggering the scary numbers that they're supposed to be catching and the tempers in the MDR department. Now, what's really creepy is when Drummond says to the doctor, you like her. And he says, she's easy to like, she's fond of me too. And he's like, well, didn't she try to break your fingers? And they're saying this while she's coming back from doing something of like a tennis match with the doctor. And we don't see what happens in that room. So it's really creepy. The more we learn about the doctor, it's creepy. And there's a lot of hints that there's some kind of sexual abuse going on here to Gemma through this doctor. If not sexual abuse, obviously he's trying to manipulate her through Severance to fall in love with him. And that's obviously clearly shown in the Christmas room, which we'll get to. But it's so crazy, speaking of that doctor, because when we go back to the past, we see the worst decision Mark and Gemma ever made was go to a Lumon fertility clinic for the next steps in trying to get pregnant. And that creepy doctor walks by them when they first get in there, which is nuts. And you see the Kier-like art on the walls of all these bodies of water. And then meanwhile, after we see they sign up in this intake form for them to go to this Lumon fertility clinic, Mark is going through in his head on that couch the tree he made for Miss Casey in his wellness session with her, which was him thinking about the tree that was at the spot of the car accident. But Gemma and Mark are both remembering the process of her getting pregnant with the help of this Lumon fertility clinic and trying to do that. Now, at one point, we see Dr. Maurer comes into Gemma in this timeline in the basement, and we see he's checking that her mouth hurts, that she knows what room it happened in. And he literally says to her, what happened in the rooms? You remember nothing? And she says in that classic type of lying smirk, nothing. So there obviously is parts of this that aren't working the way they think is working so smoothly that she is remembering bits, Gemma, of stuff that goes on in those rooms. She asks, will I see Mark? And he says, Mark will benefit from the world you are siring. Kier will take away all his pain just as Kier has taken away yours. So then he asks, how did you feel in the hall? And he says, did you exit any of the rooms feeling despair, fervor, gaiety, again checking on feelings that are associated with these tempers? She doesn't answer this question, which makes me think she is feeling some of these feelings. Obviously, we see it. And she says, there's only one room I haven't been to, and I saw it today and had a name on it now, which was Cold Harbor. And she asks, what happens once I've seen all the rooms? And he says, you will see the world again, and the world will see you. So I think obviously their plan is Gemma's going to be their big thing they bring to the public of like, this is us doing something that's our goal. And this is our first case of it actually successfully working to this level. And it will be something they probably pitch as that they brought this dead woman maybe back to life, which isn't really the case. They kidnapped her and transitioned her into someone who is like a Kier perfected clone, and whatever their mischievous goal is at the end of the day, whether it's human mind control, getting people to do things for them without them even realizing, which they've already started to practice behind the scenes. You see this with his rooms, you see this with the birthing retreats. So it's all really messed up, but I think this what they'll present to the outside world is that she's just someone who's been kind of reincarnated in this perfected way. And I don't know what their intention is with Mark at the end of the day, where Mark is an extension of this through the grief of this fake illusion of his wife dying. They've now taken advantage of him, and he's being changed into someone who is like a Kier clone. But I don't know what their end goal is with certain people like a Mark, if they want them to go the certain way that maybe a Gemma does. We'll see. It also makes me think that Irving went through what Gemma was going through, and then he got severed in different ways and different journeys that went through in the past. So that's been heavily alluded to, and how important Audie Irving is going to be to this whole story and mystery and figuring things out. Now, in the present, Devin brings up to Ragabi the birthing retreat, and she suggests, what if we take Mark to the cabin and talk to his innie there? But Ragabi's like, it's two completely different things, and that definitely wouldn't work. I'm sure that Mark's chip wouldn't activate in that cabin. It's not set for that. But then Devin suggests calling Harmony Covell, and that's when Ragabi's like, hell no. She's Lumon through and through. Since young, she's a soldier. And it's interesting. Sounds like a dumb idea, but I do think Harmony's eventually going to get that redemption arc and be someone important on the other side. What is she up to? I feel like we're definitely going to see her next episode, right? Like, it's got to be. It's been too long now. But Devin's given a great line here. Maybe my favorite episode. She's like, I have custody of his brain now, you don't. That was so funny. And Ragabi's like, you know what? I'm out. Like, she doesn't want to be involved with Covell at all. It's too risky. But this is where Mark starts saying Chick. And then we see it's because in his past memory, he's remembering Chikhai Bardo. And it's those cards we've seen in the severed floor that Milchick was totally hiding and didn't want people to see. And he's like saying to Gemma, I don't know, it looks like two guys fighting. And Gemma's like, no, it's the same guy fighting himself, defeating his own psyche, ego, death. So this is obviously what Mark has been going through in Severance and what they're doing in Severance, and kind of destroying your own self by having these two same versions of yourself kind of molding something else, getting rid of ego. And then Mark at one point suggests them stopping trying after she says she feels like she's beat to shit. So you see he's becoming more and more that pessimistic Mark we know. And it starts to make you think about when Mark was talking about recently to Ragabi about that stage of grief, about bargaining, and that this is probably where all his regrets started in his grief about how he was talking to Gemma, how he became with Gemma, and he probably wishes he can do that all over. Now with Gemma, I love the plane crash simulator. I thought that was hysterical, especially with the 80s hairdo. And again, training these people to be able to go through these different things people hate through a day and not remember them. So people on the outside won't have to do this. And those events causing those tempers we want to get rid of, right? That's the goal. But the problem is that any version of yourself is suffering through all those things still. That's why it isn't a foolproof plan. So maybe they're trying to have it that Cold Harbor is the whole sum of everything they're doing, that Gemma would be someone who's able to live life without experiencing any of these traumatic feelings, without even the use of having an any chip going forward. Now we see Drummond's looking at the computer. Mark is stuck at 96% on Cold Harbor. Drummond says, the nosebleeds set us back. Yeah, Drummond, not the sex that him and Helly are having. So it makes me wonder, like, do they know they had sex down there? Do they really get away with that? That's the funny thing about this show, is that everyone in the watching phase of it is really bad at their jobs. That includes Cobell, Milchick, and I guess even Drummond. But Drummond says to the doctor, when he's done, you're going to have to say goodbye to her. And he's like, I'm aware. And they're both saying it's for Kier, but we know this doctor loves Gemma and doesn't want to do that. And we get to see, because she lives in the Lumon building, she has a Severance food, which is like astronaut food, which is kind of cool to see it all mixed together. And they had that humor in where Drummond says to the doctor at one point, why are you wearing that stupid sweater? Because he's going all in. And I think even Drummond knows he doesn't even have to do that. But he loves Gemma. And then you see she's putting on the wedding ring when she's in the Christmas room. And this Christmas hell of handwriting these Christmas cards, it reminded me of Dolores Umbridge having Harry Potter torturing him by writing nonstop. And the creepy part is when she's leaving the room, he's like, I love you. And she doesn't answer. He's like, oh, I said I love you. And she's like, I love you too. Obviously not into him and miserable. And again, alluding to something more sinister with him and his aggression with her, and maybe why we didn't see the tennis room. And then it's very sad seeing in the past Mark taking down the baby gate and seeing how broken Gemma is. And they play I'll Be Seeing You, which is their song, and this was played when he put the pictures together of Gemma, and it was revealed to the audience who Gemma was. And she's playing it here in her room to keep her thinking of her life before this and of Mark. And Dr. Maurer comes to visit her and asks if her hand hurts, and she eventually says yes, but then says, I want to go home. And that's where he turns off the song. So of course he doesn't want that song playing. He knows that has some effect to her of home and Mark. And he says, your husband remarried last year and has a daughter now. So this is so sick and cruel he's saying this. He's like, you've been gone a long time now, Gemma. He's moved on because he wants to swoop in. But this is where it's really alluded. He's already made his move, where he's like, maybe you've moved on too in one of the rooms. What do you think? Do you find yourself gravitating to one room or another? Maybe you felt things behind those doors you never felt with Mark. So really alluding to some kind of sexual abuse and really making you think he's doing some things too that maybe aren't approved by Severance, like saying these things and trying to get him out of her outside of the room, and actually wanting her to say, yeah, I do remember that in that case, which is weird. But I do think if there was kind of sexual abuse, I think Drummond is fully aware and probably saying why he likes her. And he finds the novella and he says, let me guess, he dies at the end, talking about Ivan Ilchik, and she hits him in the head with a chair. So she is in this crazy moment where she's running through the basement. It's this horror-esque sequence now, directed so cool. I love the lights on the floor flashing, just intense. And she gets the elevator, and you knew the moment she was going to go up that it was going to be Miss Casey. But when that ding happened, I thought the episode ended. And I was like, no. I was going to be really upset if it ended there. I wanted more, and thank God it kept going on. And she's, of course, greeted by Mr. Milchick. And it's so sad because Miss Casey's life is this hallway right now. She's just stuck there. And she's about to ask where's, and it's obviously Mark she's alluding to. But Milchick's like, go on now, thank you, Miss Casey. Like, get out of here. And she's back downstairs facing Sandra Bernhardt, who's like the role of Milchick down below. And she's crying about Mark. Now, cut through this, we also see last time Outie Mark saw Gemma. And he didn't go out with her. He was focusing on his work. And again, makes you think of the stage of grief he was talking about, bargaining. These are probably all things he regrets and would have changed in his behavior. And I love when Mark's looking at the cops when they showed up. The shadow revealing his face slowly reminds me so much of the first frame of the season 1 title sequence. And it was so nice. It was reflected with Gemma looking at Sandra Bernhardt in the elevator. Really, really cool. Great editing. And now, Reintegrated Mark wakes up to Devon. And it's beautiful in the sense, too, that this is the one person currently with him in his life that's around him that loves him more than anyone, which is Devon. And like I always said, she's going to be super important for Mark in this show. She's always someone who gets him back on track. And she's like, oh, Mark, where'd you go? And you see, it's such a beautiful moment. And this is Adam Scott just acting brilliantly, but he thinks of Gemma, seeing her in that library, and then thinks of the eyes, of looking into her eyes in bed, which we saw earlier in the episode. And it's crazy because it's Innie Mark now experiencing Outie Mark's grief and his past and his traumas and his love, his life, basically. And it's Outie Mark facing his grief fully now without that chip cutting through anymore and not burying it as deep. So really, really spectacular ending. I mean, this episode was incredible. This is one of the best episodes of TV of all time. This is one of the best things I've ever seen put on a screen, period. That includes film. So overall, I'm giving this episode a 10. This is the best episode of Severance to me. So I think it had everything going for it. It still had good humor in it. It still was emotionally strong, giving so many answers while putting so many exciting little mysteries in there too, building the world more, but giving us so many payoffs from things that were built up in the past, making you excited to see what's going to happen next. I'm wondering, is Outie Mark now going to have to process Innie Mark's thoughts and love of Heliar? How is that going to go? So just being able to see this reintegrated Mark, just how he's going to behave, that's going to be a big reveal. Probably going to see next episode, so I'm excited to see that. It's just hit another level, this show. It's at a different level than any show on TV right now. And this episode proves that. So props to the director, Jessica Lee Gagne, and the writers, Dan Erickson and Mark Friedman. So really, really just blown away. I don't have one bad thing to say about this episode. And I don't know how you couldn't like it either. It's really something where it's showing you stuff in Severance that you've loved, true to the show, but adding another layer. Like I said, that kind of indie type film vibe of the past and showing you guys so much more to say and do. And it doesn't feel like it's played out. And it's really just powerful. And it feels like an episode that had to be in the creators' minds from like day one of this show. Had to be. Like this was one of those points they wanted to get to. It just felt like that. So incredible. Let me know what you thought down below and your theories. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. Try to respond as many as I can. Hit that sub button so you don't miss one of my reviews of Severance, and I'll see you next time.